We'd like to keep this fairly interactive. That's what the past day or two has been for you over here in Goa. So as far as this panel discussion is concerned, we'd like to keep it like that right from the very beginning. So don't expect a separate 15-minute discussion. Just pop in with what you have to say when we're chatting about certain subjects. If you feel differently, if you have a question, just raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you. If you could please stand so that the cameras can get you, and we'll keep the interaction going. Yes? Ready? Irfan? Yeah. Technology is changing at such a rapid pace. At this point in time, the role of the CIO is getting more and more challenging, I would say, to stay abreast of all that's happening out there and to be part of the business strategy of the various corporations that they are heading as far as information technology is concerned. In terms of the challenges of being abreast with the times, open sourcing is obviously at the helm of things that need to be considered in terms of how strategizing can happen. And the next level, obviously, is cloud computing. But we have a long way to go. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? That's what we're here to discuss. The subject of this panel discussion that we have with great panelists that we have here, I'm going to introduce you to them in a bit. But here we are to talk about the relevance of open standards and commodity architecture in the path of cloud, how CIOs are approaching this. To be able to talk about this, lend their perspectives, tell us about the innovations that are happening in various companies that are doing all of this. I begin with my left, Mr. N. Ravishankar, Chief Information Officer at Tata Sky. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Jayanta Prabhu, Chief Technology Officer at SR Group. Shiju Rotha is Head Infrastructure at Sybil. Good to have you with us as well. On my right is Arun Oberoi, Executive Vice President, Global Sales and Services at Red Hat. Mr. D.P. Van Leeuwen is General Manager and Vice President at Red Hat APAC. And Arun Kumar is General Manager at Red Hat. Good to have you with us. My first question would be just to be able to put open sourcing in perspective. Yes, there is a whole world that's opened up. How are we actually at a consumer level, so that all our viewers can understand this as well? How are we seeing it being used? Where are we seeing it? If you can just explain to me open source.
Okay, so I'll give you a summary answer, which will probably go about a mile high and an inch deep.
Okay.
In that context.
Yeah.
Open source, as opposed to or contrasted with proprietary source, is open in that it is developed by the community, by a community of developers growing by the thousands by the day, in accelerated form over the last decade or so. And it is open in the sense that it is open to the public to download. It is free. And people can download it, use it, modify it, and make it back available to the community.
Right.
The constituent
7-player market. What differentiates between us and competition is just service, right? There's hardly any product differentiation. It's already commoditized. So adopting some of these technologies gives us one leg up in terms of serving customers at a rapid pace. So that's where we're heading.
Right. And there's a lot of work at the innovation space as far as SR is concerned, because there's a huge amount of logistics involved for some of your group companies as well.
Yeah, if we talk about SR, it is a 27 billion organization spread across 25 countries. And here our challenge is that how we can give a seamless experience from IT side to end user.
Right.
And real SR IT journey started around 6 years back when we started standardizing and consolidating our entire infrastructure and technology for entire SR group. If you talk, today we have an innovation team internally. For introducing same in my organization.
Yes.
And there is a cost optimized, means there is no cost for using the technology from day one or afterwards.
Right. And you, Shiju, come from a completely different space as well. When it talks about credit worthiness of individuals and organizations, that's when people come to you. How are you using innovation in the space that we are talking about, using technology to be able to give your consumers more value for the buck that they're paying?
So today for any business, the main challenge with IT is to reduce the cost of the new technologies. So when we see for the cost, the open source is the main thing which we adopt very fast. Today we have implemented a lot of things into the open source which can give more services to the customers in terms of technology. So it's more easy to adopt. It's not a lock-in to one of the particular OEMs, first of all, so we can walk away anytime if you want, but it's more easier, it's more customizable. Since it's more customizable, we can give more services to the customers.
Right, so the window of opportunities becomes that much larger, and you're not bound to a vendor. Has that been your experience as well? If you can demarcate the two experiences, working experiences, when you are with a proprietary kind of setup, as opposed to the open source kind of setup?
On a proprietary kind of setup, if you ask me, there isn't much of a chance for innovation, or time to market is a little bit lengthier.
Right.
When it comes to open source, I am able to see the man who's written the code, what my customer requirements are, and I'm able to offer that in a jiffy.
Right.
So my time to market or hit the market to my end consumers or the trade is a significant milestone in adopting open source.
Right.
This is absolutely. One question that's sort of unanswered in this equation is, so how does a company like Red Hat make money selling free software? Sort of an important question as well.
Well, yes. But yes.
But let me just comment on that, and I'll get to your question, because it is sort of an open question here. So we take all the source that gets out there in the community, thousands and thousands of lines of code, and when enterprises, like the ones we are talking about, want to use it on mission-critical, life-critical types of applications, it's important that it's hardened, it's supported for years and years across multiple types of platforms, and you can hang your hat on what you're developing. So that's where we step in.
Right.
And we take the code, we harden it inside of Red Hat, make it available back to the community, the then offer that kind of support. And we make our sort of revenues based on that subscription model of support.
Right. But my essential question is, has this been, as far as the demarcation that they're talking about, now that has been the driving force in terms of using open source technology. What didn't happen with the proprietary kind of setup? Are all of those concerns getting addressed through this technology?
To a point, it's the whole movement of open source is evolving, and the community is growing at an exponential rate. And the point Ravi was making is, you can get only a certain amount of speed and agility in terms of what you get in terms of output from a proprietary setup, because you only got so many people that you can afford working on the code, versus thousands, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of people contributing to it.
Right.
So it's just by that simple law that you get a lot more productivity coming out of that kind of an environment.
Right. But to be able to use open source technology, obviously you want to get the kind of
skill on Unix, for that matter. There are guys who are probably certified on a different platform. At the end of the day, it's a commodity. Not much of a differentiation is there between two products.
Right.
So we take the risk of taking him here. Okay, he is able to kind of go through the motions of training and upskilling himself.
Right.
And he comes on board and gets into a level 5 maturity in about 3 to 6 months, and that's the time that we give to invest on talent.
Right. So investment in talent, now that, Arun, is very crucial for this entire space to develop. Are there enough people out there who are able to use an existing technology and be able to guide organizations on what they can do with it?
Sure. An interesting fact is we have a very, very important part of our strategy, which is training and consulting. Like Ravi said, skills is very important for consumption at the end of the day. If you look at a metric, India has the highest number of Red Hat certified people globally. It's a very interesting metric. So if you think about the total number of certified Red Hat engineers, India is at the top of the list.
I'm being asked to just hold on for a moment. There is an audio problem. Rest of everything that's happening. Open source is one technology that lends itself to be able to innovate, to get business strategies and goals that are set, to get them in tandem with everything that is being planned for an organization. Obviously, a CIO is at the helm of affairs to be able to guide that kind of change and be able to take the organization to the next level and keep it ahead of the curve, as it were. So here we are at this panel discussion in Goa to be able to discuss the relevance of open standards and commodity architecture in the path of cloud. And we're talking about how CIOs are approaching it. To be able to discuss this, let me introduce this wonderful panel that we've got here. On my left is N. Ravi Shankar. He's Chief Information Officer at Tata Sky. Jayanta Prabhu is Chief Technology Officer at SR Group. Shiju Rotha is Head of Infrastructure at Civil. On my right, Arun Oberoi, Executive Vice President, Global Sales and Services at Red Hat. DP Van Leeuwen is General Manager and Vice President, Red Hat, APAC. And Arun Kumar is General Manager, Red Hat. Good to have you all, gentlemen. To be able to put this in perspective, I turn to you, Arun. What is open source for the large benefit of our viewers out there? If you can put that in perspective and how it's being used today.
So in this context, I'll keep it at a summary level. I'll go a mile high, an inch deep. And open source, as contrasted with proprietary source, is open. And when we say open, we mean open as in built by, developed by a community of developers, a growing community of developers, which is growing by the day exponentially so. And it's made available to the community. Anyone can download it for free, as opposed to proprietary software, which has to be paid for,
right,
which the source code is owned by the company that makes it, and they have their own IPs on it. They don't distribute it freely. This software is available openly. It's the communities develop and give it back to the community. So it's a growing base of code which adds a lot of agility, speed of innovation, and just immense rich functionality into it.
Right.
The types of people that contribute to it range from very large companies to individuals and thousands across the world.
Right. So obviously it throws up a world of opportunities. You having worked, DP, in the APAC region, where do you think India stands at this point in time to be able to use this huge window of opportunity?
Well, I can compare quite well across the region, and I think India is leading in many ways. And one particular way in which India is leading in the adoption of open source is in the government space. Obviously, given the sheer size of India and the challenges that the Indian government has to deploy software and the costs associated make open source uniquely suitable. But the challenge of getting that done and implementing an entire stack is quite big. And I can say that I'm very proud to see that India has successfully done this with Red Hat technology and other technologies. And so I think India is quite leading in this area.
Yes. And we have some consumers as well. As far as you're concerned, Ravi, what is happening at Tata Sky by way of innovation using open source?
Media business, basically direct to home, is a commodity business in India. Right? There's 6 or 7 player market. The only difference which can give one leg up to the business is service, right? By adopting open standards, I'm able to offer this to my leadership team and to end consumers to keep pace with their demands and ensure that the service is fully met for for the trade as well as end customers.
Right. Can you give us an example of the kind of innovation that your team at the core of being able to give your consumers more value?
Yeah, we guarantee if an installer or a repair doesn't get attended in 4 hours time, we don't charge any money. Right, that's a service guarantee.
Sure.
Like some of these things can happen only if I enable technology behind and the machinery works along with it.
Right.
Right.
So is this a later development? Is
No.
this something that has happened in the recent past?
This is in around 6 months, it's operational.
I see. Right. At SR Group, what has been your core team's strategy to be able to take on the possibilities that open source lends itself to?
See, SR is a 27 billion organization spread across 25 countries, and we have around 75,000 people working across the globe. And our main strategy is that how we can improve the employees' productivity and we can give a seamless experience to end users. And innovation side, 2 kind of innovation is going on. One is innovation on IT, and second is innovation on plant automation side.
Right.
And we have an innovation team of around 7 people, and they are closely working with all major OEMs to understand their roadmap.
Right.
And what kind of technology they are bringing, and how I can fit that technology in my existing architecture so that I can reduce the cost, I can improve their employees' productivity, and I can give a seamless experience to end user.
Can you give a small example of the innovation that you might have had in one of your group companies?
One of the example I'm sharing, I must shared in today morning also. One of the requirement came from business is that how I can train senior people who are always on move. And how I can extend all the communications which is happening in corporate level when they're traveling. And we have discussed with all the proprietary vendors for kind of solution, and they told this solution is not available, or they will take another 6 to 8 months to come out with a solution for that. Then we have contacted a open source technology vendor, and he's agreed to develop a solution for us.
Right.
And within 3 months' time, he has developed a solution. And benefits like today, I have a studio in my organization where I'm recording all the senior management message, HR communication, and all the HR related training. I'm pushing on individual employees' smartphone, and employees in their leisure time, they can sit and watch all these videos.
Right.
So that I'm reaching all the employees today, and video communication is taking a lead in your organization.
Right.
Means people are stopped going through the intranet, and all the SR group communication, it's happening through video today.
Arun, from what you were saying, by way of what you do at Red Hat, this example that he's offering in terms of being able to use a certain technology and giving a certain kind of value addition to the organization, how can you make it better? By doing what? What kind of service can you offer that will help streamline this innovation?
So two things, really. So the levels we operate on is we are a big contributor to the community, the open source community. We're a big proponent of the open source community. And the more life the open source community has, the more contributions we can make to our customers. At the other level, what we get from the open source community is, in many cases, projects. Some of them are loosely coupled projects. So we at Red Hat, we take those projects, we harden them, we make them platforms, we make them products, we harden them, and then we take those, make sure they're tested, verified across a range of platforms, thousands of platforms, so that in turn our customers, what they get from us is hardened code where they can deploy mission-critical, life-critical applications. And there's numerous examples around the world. Half the world's stock exchanges run on Red Hat open source software. Right. These are critical applications. Sure. And they're supported by us. In fact, that's our business model as well. Sure. The software is available free. Our business model is more about supporting it and making revenues from the support services.
But having said that, I mean, we have been late entrants, being able to use the kind of technologies that we do. Considering that it has been around for some time, why is the move so late and so considered, I would say? Because obviously there have been concerns about security and other things, but where does it stand right now? And this move towards it, being able to use this technology better, why is it taking its time? What's your sense?
I think if you look at the last 36 months, we've seen an acceleration in that adoption here in the country, right? Like DP mentioned, the government of India was a very big proponent of open source and open standards. We saw this proliferating into the financial markets. There are stock exchanges in India that today run extensively on Red Hat. We've seen this permeate into telecom organizations where, and again, if you think about, where revenues are declining, ARPUs or average revenue per users are declining, the cost structure has to go down. So we've seen the adoption of open source and Red Hat quite heavily in telecom organizations. We've seen that happen, and this has traditionally been the top. These are the first three sectors that adopt new technologies anywhere in the world, right? Even 11 years back when we started our journey, it was Wall Street that kicked off the adoption of Red Hat. So we're seeing very similar things. Now we're seeing mainstream organizations. We're seeing manufacturing, chemical, automotive. Everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. And a large part of that has got to do with the fact that today it's mainstream. The skills are available in the marketplace. The partners, the big system integrators, they all know this. They know the advantages. So it's the whole ecosystem that's coming together. Right. It's a little late, you're right, but I think the great thing about India is we don't have the legacy that the Western world has.
Which is?
So if you think about infrastructure build-out, India and China lead the world because of greenfield infrastructure build-out, right? So the next few years is going to see an explosion of infrastructure in these markets, whereas Western world has had infrastructure that's extremely dated. So, for example, if you look at cost structure of our telecom service providers in India, and you compare that to anywhere in the Western world, it's a fraction, right? And the reason is because they were set up fairly new. They didn't have the legacy to deal with, so they could innovate in those business models straight up from the ground. Right. And so a huge difference when you're doing a lot of greenfield projects versus having to do rip and replace, which can be very expensive from a technology perspective and a people perspective.
Yes. But you mentioned an important point, which is cost effectiveness. Now, what is the driving force to be able to adapt to open source technology? What is going to drive me in terms of if a corporation is considering moving on from the proprietary kind of setup, is cost the best selling point, or are there other factors that they need to consider as well?
Well, there's many factors that are being considered, but I think cost is often the key factor that is being taken into account. I think the key advantage of using open source is the fact that you don't have any licensing cost. Because any proprietary software has a licensing cost to it. And a licensing cost is is not just an operational expense, but it's a capital expense, right? So that capital expense goes away when you use open source. So the cost to going to open source is relatively low in comparison to any proprietary solution.
Right. Yes, of course.
I think the other huge thing that's happened in the last 3 years, a lot of it driven by innovation from Intel, and we participate in that innovation cycle, is the performance aspect. If you talk to stock exchanges today around the world, it's not so much about cost, it's how quickly am I going to execute a trade. So when the market is falling or going up in whichever direction, that microsecond, nanosecond makes a huge difference, could be a couple of $1 million. So if you think about the stock exchanges that we work with around the world, for them, while cost is an important part of the value equation, they also want to get the most cutting-edge performance out of their systems. And so we've seen that paradigm shift from just being cost to a lot of emphasis on performance. And then the most important thing now, as you think about the cloud, everybody wants to be in an open platform. Nobody wants to be locked into something proprietary. So you take a combination of these three, that's the perfect storm in terms of why open source would become adopted in a very big way in any place around the world.
So is getting on the cloud the ultimate end game as far as you're concerned in terms of what's driving innovation as well? Because open source is going to be a step towards that.
At least for Tata Sky, cloud is not going to be a big thing for us, at least in the near future. Right? We already are on some cloud platforms. We're trying to fold that back into our infrastructure. Right? It's becoming unviable. Having said that, there is enormous opportunity sitting on the table for consolidation. Right? I just spoke about some time back to the senior people, and we should be looking at a plethora of projects around the consolidation area.
Right. What's driving innovation for you?
Yeah, SR is the first organization who taken some of the critical applications on cloud. Means we use Microsoft Azure for our requirement today. And we are working very closely with the Red Hat today, and we are doing a proof of concept on a SAP environment. And they have given us a tool which we are running on our production environment, which will collect all the details, and they will come out with a strategy for us. And our long-term strategy is that we want to take all the SAP DevQ environment on cloud.
Right.
So it's a long-term strategy.
So when you say long-term, how long a period are you looking at?
It's maybe next 1 year.
In a year's time? Yeah. What about you? What's driving innovation for Sibyl, and what is the end game there?
The challenge for any of the IT department is the cost today, vis-a-vis along with implementation of the new technologies. So same challenges we faced along with reduction of the footprints what we have today onto the server farms. We, along with Red Hat, implemented a RHEV platform, and majorly of the servers have been migrated on the Red Hat platform. Cloud, we are looking for the DR perspective. We are evaluating onto the cloud platforms to move down to the DR infrastructure into the complete cloud, which is on the roadmap, as well as the UAT platforms. So that's the roadmap for the Sibyl for next.
But you deal with a lot of sensitive data, yes? And getting on the cloud, etc. Your security concerns would be extremely high.
Yes.
Is there a concern still?
Yeah, that's a concern. That's the reason we are evaluating it properly, whether it's a right way to go or not. So we are into evaluation phase, which will take around more 5 to 6 months' time.
Right.
So once we fit into that, then probably we'll go ahead with that. So the major of the challenge is the data security. So that's a concern with us.
How is a company like yours being able to address security concerns? And I think that's what has been holding Indian companies back for a long time.
You know, so the core, there's at multiple levels is sort of the answer to that. So at the core, Linux is just very highly secure. And the work we're doing around extending Linux with the work we're doing around virtualization built on this KVM kernel is by its function, by its design, very highly secure, very highly scalable into cloud-type environments. So there's multiple levels of security that we're addressing either directly through Red Hat, in some cases through partnerships that are out there. But you're right, the essence of making sure that very private applications can go to the cloud, you need to address the security issue at different levels.
Do you find a lot of consumers also doing work at their end to be able to secure the kind of setups that you have got going already?
Okay, let me probably correct this. It's a myth that open source platforms are highly vulnerable. Today morning I was presenting, and I've done my own work. 92% of the vulnerabilities are plugged even before a COTS product is, vulnerabilities are plugged, right? Meaning it takes years to build that confidence.
Right.
Right. So you got to kind of believe that, it's not that anything that we pick up at a subscription cost or something which is a marginal cost doesn't mean that, you're trading off the organization. As an organization, we are also expected to build in the necessary controls, hardening and firewall and zoning, etc., which any prudent IT team would do.
Right.
Right. So today,
So you're saying that there's no remarkable shift in terms of heightened security concerns when it comes to open source?
That's none. In fact, I would say open source is better off compared to the COTS products.
Right. Does the audience agree? Are there other points of view in terms of security concerns when it comes to using open source technology? No? What are the concerns, I would like to ask, when it comes to being able to adopt and adapt? Any viewpoints? Sure.
So, lot of my customers, they tell that open source, the code is open, anybody can read it.
Yeah.
So it's more vulnerable as compared to proprietary. So that's what I want to know now. Others also should be aware why it is not vulnerable when the code is open.
I'd love to answer that. I think it's the opposite, actually, because it's open, any vulnerability will be out there immediately and will be immediately fixed. If you look at proprietary software, and we've seen many examples of this, problems and security risks can exist for a long time before they can be found, can be recognized, and vendors have the ability to keep them hidden for everybody and having their customers sensitive to vulnerabilities. In open source, as soon as there is a risk, as soon as there's a vulnerability, the community will find it and it will be plugged immediately. So it's highly secure and way more secure than any other proprietary solution.
Yeah. Now, yes, you have. Sorry, I thought you had a point. But we're seeing a lot of vendors out there as well, and some of them are much larger fish as far as being able to service the kind of needs of industry are concerned. Would you rather go with the big ones, or would you go with the specialized ones and the kind of setup that we have already? What is on offer? What's on the table? What is a better way to go for organizations like yours?
We are already on a hybrid model.
Yeah.
Just embracing open source as we go along. In the full 9 yards, in 3 years' time, at least 30 to 40% of the IT infrastructure. It's my personal vision to get there.
Right.
On open source. Let's see.
You have a point on that?
Yeah, we are seriously evaluating open source technology. Means the flexibility it gives and the opportunity to do the innovation and the cost optimization which it gives.
Yes.
It's very difficult to ignore open source technology at all.
Right.
Means we are seriously considering and we may move some of the critical applications on open source technology with the help of Red Hat coming days.
Yeah, but let me ask you in terms of getting the right kind of manpower, because skilled manpower is it's a problematic situation for most industries. And this, because it requires so much application, I would imagine it's more so. Is it possible to be able to build your own teams to generate the kind of technologies using open source?
Very much possible. As I said, the differentiation on two products is none, and that's the reason you call it a commodity, right?
Right.
If somebody's worked in an RDBMS or any operating system, the guy shaping up on any other product just needs a little bit of understanding, and you need to give him some time to pick up. So I think that, as a leader, I think you're entitled to give that to him so that he can upskill and be part of you.
Yeah, but it is an investment in time in being able to take a team through all the possibilities out there. So they work in isolation? Are they? How exactly does the setup work?
They work with our own SIs. Mm-hmm. They don't obviously work in isolation. They need to understand the nuances of how they're going to support it, how they're going to embrace it, because they become, I would say, the co-owners, and they will start trumpeting some of the technologies that they're part of in the organization drive.
Right. And how well would they be integrated? Because you said it's an investment in time. So in terms of integrating into the entire business strategy of the vertical that they're working in, how closely would they be working towards a specific goal?
Yeah, absolutely. They will not be going North Pole and South Pole. They will have to be clearly following one goal, what we intend to do, to satisfy the requirements of the customer.
Right.
Simple.
Yeah. So you would highlight a goal, and they would be working towards creating.
Yeah, absolutely. They would be bound by their own KRAs, and there are some finite deliverables that once you onboard a person, right? It's not a GET who comes on a trainee for 6 months, and obviously these are people who have gone through 3 to 5 years in the industry, who has worked on cross-platform. You're trying to give him an opportunity on a different platform and see how he performs. That's how it happens all the time in the world.
Right. So are we seeing a lot of specialization happen over here and a lot of players bringing different things to the table to be able to choose from?
Yeah, just by definition, when you have the kind of acceleration that we're seeing in open source, across all spectrums, you know, across all the layers of open source that are out there, the skills become much more available. And we do our part and others do their part, other companies do their part as well in terms of certification courses and training courses, etc. So we're seeing a huge uptick. If you look at the market share, just as one example, that Linux has as part of the overall OS market, the operating system market, it's a very significant market share growing at the fastest rate compared to other OSs. So it's an immediate employability potential if you can get trained and certified on it. So I think the skill issue, you make a good point. You know, in the nascent stages it was slower development, but now it's mainstream and getting even more mainstream as we go forward. So the skills issue is much less of an issue. It's much more widely available.
From what I understand, from the manpower perspective, I just feel that the innovation possibilities are so high that sometimes, because we are so used to working in a setup, in a certain kind of box, kind of infrastructure, if I may call it that, yes, this one is just so wide that you might be lost in the maze.
Quite the opposite. So the good news is that IT, enterprise IT, even consumer IT, the way it's used, there's a lot of process, there's a lot of governance, there's a lot of procedures around it, and that's the way it has evolved. So when you think about a layer of IT, say the infrastructure layer of operating systems, or the infrastructure layer of middleware to create and deliver services, there's some established practices that have come down over the years and that continue to be imbibed, whether it's open source software or proprietary software. So it's really not quite a maze. It's quite an organized pattern of development. It's just a lot more innovation going into it because of the big community that contributes to it.
That's right. So it's happening on such a large scale. At least the entire space just seems so huge. Yeah. That's why I'm thinking that it's a maze. But yes.
Just to add to that,
sure.
I think it demonstrates agility. It's important.
Yeah.
You know, how people respond to the internal needs.
Right.
So I think that's the point.
Absolutely. So why don't you tell me what's the process? Because someone will come and tell you within the organization that this is the need. You identify that as a need that needs to be served. There is a need gap over there. How is technology going to play a part to be able to address that need? Yeah. Is that how it works?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah?
I mean, we have, a change review committee who review these changes. You know, they meet weekly and, they look at the user requirements and they understand what's the current IT landscape. They put an appropriate design solution, architect, and build the app.
Right. Is that how it works for you as well?
It's the same. Means we have a technology committee meeting which is happening on weekly basis, where we all seniors sit together and understand the existing architecture, what is the new requirement, and then we decide which technology to go. In parallel, our innovation team, they are bringing a lot of stuff on table.
Right.
And what's happening in individual technology area, and they are understanding individual partners' roadmap, and if any new drastic step it is required to change the technology, then we take a call.
Right.
And training part, I want to add something. See, technology is changing very fast. Training anyway, it's happening in individual organization. Means to retain employees and to adopt the changes is happening in technology area, we need to train our people.
Right.
That's a continuous process, it's happening. Here also we are taking all the partners' help like Red Hat, Microsoft and others. They are training our people so that they're allowing us to adopt that new technology in our setup.
Right.
And in SR, what is happening, we do a lot of alpha and beta testing for individual partners. And more than 25 beta testing which is happening in our environment. So benefit to SR is that we are getting that early mover advantage. And second, for a partner, it is a environment what they are getting to test their product in live environment.
Right.
Is that benefit. Means recently Windows 8, when they wanted to launch, we have done a beta testing for Microsoft in India. Right. And I was sharing the platform with the Microsoft to launch their product. Same thing we are doing for other partners, for Avaya, Red Hat and others also.
Right.
Just to add to this point about usability, you raise an important point about usability of software in this maze, in this technology maze. unlike proprietary software, for most part, which is written by engineers sitting inside a company, this software, this open source software, in many cases comes from our customers.
Right.
So it's truly the democratization of the process of creating code.
Right.
It's by the people, for the people, of the people, and it better reflect their needs because it's coming from them.
Right.
So to that extent, it's much more applicable to the business architectures that they in the end.
So you're seeing this as more of an enabling role. This technology, what it offers, is being that much more of an enabler than we've seen in the past.
Precisely, because it's being built by the community that
Right.
uses it for the most part.
Now, mobility is very high in terms of within organizations, the kind of gadgetry that we use, social networking is so big. How does that help the cause of open source?
Enormously, if I may answer that, and I'm sure my colleagues here will have great answers as well. So the best thing that's happened to the world in talking about democratization of technology is mobility.
Yes.
And the best thing that's happened is that bandwidth has finally come together so that voice, video, data, truly it's seamless mobility across the board. And you're seeing it across India and all over the place. Now, in addition to that, there's also this. It's not just the machine-to-man sort of interface, not the device-to-man interface. There's also the machine-to-machine mobility factor, which is creating incredible, the industrial internet, which is just a happening thing. This is the Internet of Things, where machine-to-machine, mobile machines to other machines, connected to intelligent systems, create intelligent automation. So all this is creating just an explosion of mobility, being the driver, explosion of the use of the infrastructure. And in the end, the fountain of the infrastructure is the data center, which is where all this comes together.
Right. Why don't you give me an example of how this is all tying in with the kind of mobility that we enjoy right now?
Yeah, well, before I do that, I'd like to clear a misconception that I sort of feel exists here in the room, which is that moving to open source is difficult. Because it definitely isn't that open source is black and white and that you either use completely open source or you don't.
Right.
So many of the existing solutions run databases, run applications that would equally well, with very little work, run on open source. So the transition from proprietary to open source isn't that hard and doesn't take all that much training and knowledge. And that is actually really what most of our customers have been doing. Very few customers have moved entirely to open source. And that's where I made the example earlier of the Indian government, because they have moved entirely to open source in a number of projects. But the majority of our customers just take those components that they want to transition to open source and transition those.
Would you call it scaling up still?
Yeah, we still call it scaling up. But it's also using the commoditization of this industry and moving from proprietary hardware to commodity hardware,
right.
Using the Intel technologies instead of the mainframes.
Right.
And that is saving tremendous amounts of cost, and not only that, it also improves performance. So I think it's an important point to make when you talk about open source, that it's not just about using or talking about a large-scale project, because really it isn't.
Right.
It's a very natural transition into the next generation.
Right, but we're still talking about change, and change, how it can be difficult if you're used to a certain kind of setup.
It's the perception of difficulty.
The kind of transition is always going to have its pain points, and that's perhaps where it's coming from, and which is why, like we were saying, it's taking its time, yes? But do give us an example. What I was asking you is about mobility and how it's actually tying in. So perhaps you can tell us where have you seen it be most effective?
So let me pull the question back to one level. So think about Google, right? And think about the scale of Google. I read somewhere recently that Google has reached 1.7 million servers in the data center, right? That's an unbelievable number.
Yeah.
Just to put that in perspective, China, according to IDC, ships 1.3 million servers in a year, all of China, right? So you're talking about a server foot farm that's bigger than all the servers shipped in China. Now, I'll come to the mobility in a second, but I have to draw this first. Google could not scale to that level if they were not on a commodity architecture and they were not using a lot of open source components, right? Now, what does Google deliver at the end of the day? They deliver the content on a device, right? So what you see in the form of mobility in the device is a form factor, but all that information is getting crunched in the back end in those 1.8 million servers. Now, again, this is ad hoc information available on the internet. So where open source drives mobility, which is what Arun was driving, is the processing and the computation is not happening at the device. The device is just merely representing the final endpoint of information. Where information gets crunched, think about the Google search algorithms, all of that is sitting in the data center. If you look at the largest scale data centers, whether it's Google, it's Facebook, they're one of the largest proponents. They contribute to the community extensively. They consume open source extensively. So that's where I think you'll see open source having a very profound impact on the role of mobility in today's technology. If you were sitting on old mainframes, you would not be able to deliver the kind of information that you have to deliver today with the kind of bandwidth that we have on devices.
Also in the time that's taken, right?
Exactly.
Yes? Yeah. So this, like you're saying, is an example. But in terms of within an organization, for employees to be able to use the benefits of open source technology, I was looking for a good example.
Okay. Ours is a extremely, labor-intensive organization, field force. We have in excess of 15,000 people to serve end consumers, basically categorized as installers to install the new connections, and field repair person in case the set-top box is not working or either have pixelization or any such issues, right? So for internal customers, scheduling on a mobile is becoming paramount for Tata Sky, right? So in the coming months or years, you will find that adoption happening. And similarly, we already have something for end consumers. He can do whatever he wants to do on a simple mobile app.
Right.
Whatever is there on the web is also available on the ubiquitous mobile.
Right. So it's about bringing it all together?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah. In your case, because obviously you're catering to employees, I don't know how many people do you have?
75,000.
75,000. 75,000. It's a huge number of people. Now to be able to integrate, how are you being able to use that? Or at least what's the target? What are you working towards to be able to create something that employees will find most useful?
See, SR is the first organization who had given BlackBerry, who is implemented BlackBerry solution in India and given mobile handset, BlackBerry handset to around 6,500 people for improving their productivity, mail access, and a lot of applications also we are rolled out. And 6 months back, we have published a BYOD policy. And today we are allowing employees to bring their own device or own laptop. And applications that we are giving. Open source technology and mobility side, we are working with vendors. Till date, we have one application we already developed. It's from Drona for a video content streaming. We are working with the multiple partners on bringing more applications, right, so that that's once again seamless experience we can extend. And as part of BYOD policy, today employees, they can use their tablet device for doing a video conferencing. They can use their video, this one tablet for doing a voice conferencing or a voice call to my VoIP setup. That is that capability we have extended to end users.
Right. What about you, Shiju, in terms of applications? And there is a great need for that as well within organizations like yours. Easy access to information.
Being security concerns, we have not yet given more over to the mobility into the preference, but we are evaluating for the BYOD thing so that we can give more access to our own employees so that they can work from home as well as while traveling they can access the system and can work on from anywhere. So it's under evaluation process. So we're looking for next 1 year to be in place, which we can finalize the things.
Right.
So, but being of the concerns, security concerns, we are not yet taken it up.
That's right.
Yep.
But more and more, we're going to find organizations wanting to be able to share information, being able to put in those security standards as well that is going to secure the information that they don't want going out. So in that sense, there is an opportunity as much as a challenge. Wouldn't you agree?
So I think the good news is the security industry has evolved to a point where, for the most part, you can, there's always hackers out there that will hack anything, right? For the most part, security has evolved that you can really protect a lot. So I think this sort of, there's an easing in the enterprise, even in the government and so on, of allowing much more mobility because that's how people work. You work on the go. So it's happening. It's happening slower in certain industries than others. But I can see a time in the not too distant future when even healthcare, and there's just a lot of other industries you can look at, where mobility is going to be the answer to solving those problems, because people, when they get sick, are not just lying down in a hospital, they're out there somewhere.
Yeah.
And you have to, mobility in the end has to become the driver for making life more higher quality.
Absolutely. Mobility is about accessibility, being able to work on the move and all of that. In terms of innovativeness, where all the regions that you worked in, what innovation have you found that really stuck out as, extraordinary?
On the mobility side, there's actually, I want to go back to what Arun said, because the mobility is really showing the data, is presenting the data. I think the actual developments are happening in the cloud. And cloud computing is really what drives all this. And even on the security side, right? If you would in the old days would lose your laptop or your phone with all the data on it, you would be in big trouble because somebody would find it. Now, if it's on the cloud, it's no longer as vulnerable as it is when it's in your pocket.
Right.
So I think that's one important thing to note when you talk about mobility and security. Taking that forward, you see many developments around cloud computing where data is portable, accessible from all ends. In our own company, we're a good example of it because we use our entire sales force uses the ability to go mobile to the sales data and to share all the information about customers, to share updates about what they're doing in the customers. So I think that's pervasive around the world. I don't see anything spiking out in this region where I say, well, this is really something special. But it's maybe because I've become so accustomed to all the new technology myself.
Yeah, and staying ahead of the curve, even for people within the space, like yourselves, is constantly a challenge because, like I said, such a huge window of opportunities. Yes?
We agree. We think this is, if I was telling the team earlier, this is the best time to be alive. It's the best time to be alive and in this industry as a user, as a consumer, and as a provider of technology. And so, the rate of change, the pace of change is just accelerating by the day.
Yes, but also I understand that this is free, open source. It's open for anyone to be able to do innovation in.
Absolutely.
So
right.
what drives a company like yours to be able to make sure that the margins are there and the profits are getting turned in?
So the good news is we get all the benefits of the innovation. The good news also is that we do our part, and we are the major, by far, contributor back to the community in the spaces that we're in. And so it sort of promotes our business model to promote a lot back to the community. So that's one piece of it. In terms of how we make our money and how we satisfy our investors and so on, our business model is about taking the code, which is built by the community, bringing it in-house, hardening it, testing it, making sure it is usable in very mission-critical, life-critical types of situations. And when you, as an enterprise, deploy very mission-critical code, even though you can get it for free from somewhere else, if something breaks, you need someone to fix it.
Right.
And if I'm a financial services company, I'd much rather focus on building my financial services business than focusing on fixing bugs and getting enhancements
But
in
you
the
think
code.
that the innovation team would have thought it through and would be able to tackle situations as and when they arise?
Well, their business, his business, Ravi's business is content. He'd much rather focus on what he
Right.
does
So
and
there
let
is-
us focus on supporting him in the infrastructure layer.
Right, so there is
I won't
adequate-
speak for you, Ravi. You can speak to
You
yourself.
can correct it. Yeah, so in terms of specialization, by way of what you bring to the table as well, there's a lot of that happening, right?
Yes.
In that sense, there is the world of opportunity at every level for a consumer, for a service provider, for able to kind of hardening codes like you mentioned. There's so much that's happening in that space, and we can only look forward to more, but obviously the pace of change, like we talked about, perhaps needs to be faster than what it is.
Right. One example which sort of proves a point is even commercial software companies that produce proprietary software. There was a statistic quoted by Gartner, who was here this morning. 85% of commercial proprietary software companies use open source in a big way as part of the code that they sell.
Right.
Because it's available faster, sooner, more agile, more innovative, and they use it. And so, there's proof points, not just in the enterprise, there's even proof points in proprietary software companies using open source to get their stuff out there faster.
And Arun, as far as opportunity loss is concerned, for people who don't see the advantages of being able to go through with this at this point in time? Because obviously when you're looking at technology, we're looking at that fast pace of change, but you're also looking way into the future. And we need foresight to be able to see what's coming and how we're going to be able to deal with it with the kind of requirements that an organization would have. What is the opportunity loss if we don't buy into this right now?
Well, I think companies that innovate will thrive. Companies that stagnate will not, right? So if you think about innovation from a business perspective, today innovation in business is very closely tied to the innovation from a technology perspective that Ravi was saying, right? If you're not able to back up your business ideas with very sound technology delivery and time to market, you're going to struggle. And if you look at most markets getting extremely competitive, whether it's the financial industry, whether it's the telecom service providers, automotive, margins are wafer thin. Now, how do you, in such an environment, are able to step ahead of competition? And if you think about a lot of the Web 1 revolution that we've seen the last 10 years, look at the companies that have grown up, right? Companies like Amazon, companies like eBay. Technology innovation has driven these companies to where they are, right? Obviously, there were business model innovations, right? Amazon started selling books, and then they finally said, we're a marketplace. Anybody can come, anybody can buy, right? eBay, again, from an auction perspective. Now, that level of business innovation had to be backed by technology, right? And I think that if you look at all of these companies, again, if I tie it back to where we come into the picture, huge consumers and huge proponents and contributors of open source. So I say this, that the velocity of innovation in open source cannot be matched, because you're talking about 1 million people, in some cases, who are building code, compared to a company that best, and some of the biggest software companies have a few 10,000 people doing R&D. Now, you can't match a few 10,000 people against 1 million eyes, right? And that's where I think that innovation cycle and that velocity of innovation will drive the business to be ahead of the curve. And so I think people who don't look at it, that's the opportunity loss that they're facing in the future.
That's
if you
right.
believe that innovation is going to be what drives business in the future.
Yes, and innovation is where it's at, and it's something that we have been saying for a long time. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us with your perspectives. This has been revelatory on many, many fronts. I'm sure our audience here is also taking away a lot of what we've said over here and being able to plan for the future using open source technology and the windows of opportunities that it creates. Thank you indeed for joining us. We hope the interaction continues. Many, many thanks.